Oh, lights and everything. It is good morning, Glastonbury. Yeah, just before I start, just share some stuff. I think most people know, but I'm also hosting a learning marathon right now. I'm 5 months into I just wanted to sort of like put that out again as well, because just to Imi's point. So with all the work that I'm up to, but I'm learning all the time, and I've got my own questions, my own inquiries, and I think this whole idea of just that being a kind of, for me, it almost feels like it's almost like an antidote to a lot of the sort of chaos that's going on. This idea of to keep evolving yourself and to keep helping others evolve themselves. So I just wanted to put that there, because I sometimes Mark's come to do a talk and I was like, I'm not an expert. I'm a learner. I'm an earthling trying to make sense of this world and do what I can to bring some more beauty in on my watch while I'm here. But yeah, so anyway, the learning marathons are awesome. They work, and you're going to have a wild time. So just to start, I thought we could do a little experiment, if that's all right, because I like experiments. Again, no one's going to get harmed here. But I'm just going to invite you to close your eyes. If you can, just close your eyes. Maybe take a deep breath in. Breathe out. Take another deep breath in. Breathe out. And I want you to just think about where you feel most happy, most at ease, most content. Where you feel most happy, most at ease, most content. So maybe just sort of take that in, just any kind of sensory things from that. Maybe there's some sounds or some smells. Okay, you can open your eyes, come back into the room. See, that didn't hurt, did it? Right, we're going to do a quick survey here. If you can just raise your hand, who was at work? There's an artist. There's always the artists are the only one that put up their hand if they're at work. Who was shopping? Who was buying stuff? No. Who was on the internet? No, what? Oh, you were on the internet. Oh, it's your work. Excellent. Who was driving cars? Okay. Who was in bed? There's always someone in bed. There we go. A few people in bed. Who was outside in a natural environment? Okay. That's like a pretty big chunk. And I'm guessing who was with people they love? Okay. Brilliant. It's amazing, isn't it? It's like the things that make us the happiest, being with people we love, being out in nature, increasingly are the things that seemingly we do less of. And the things we tend to spend so much time doing, so much of our lives doing, are weirdly the things that don't make us happy. I always find that's completely sort of one of the most baffling sort of things of our time. Anyway, we'll move on. So last night, if you remember, I was talking about the Stories for Life work and talking about this separation narrative, this idea over the last few hundred years, particularly in the West, that we've sort of viewed ourselves as separate beings, separate from the natural world around us, separate from each other, and how to sort of change that, to evolve that story to this interconnected story, this love story, that actually we're in relationship with the living world. The natural world is not a slave. It's not a slave to humanity. It's not dead, inert matter. It's alive. It's living. And to shift, how might we shift that view of that world so we start to see the living world as our family and each other as our fellow human beings, that we're moving to this story of interconnection. That's a big shift. It's a big shift to make that. And that's sort of right at the hub of my work right now. But I think the thing is, you have to feel it. You have to feel this. We can't really think our way into that future where we see the natural world as our family, where we see each other as our fellow human beings. So I sort of think about this next 10 years, and I think about, like, how do we scale sort of falling in love again with the world? That's the kind of thing that I'm sort of questioning every day. What would that look like? How are we going to fall back in love with the world in the next 10 years? And this is about feeling the donut, I think, as I was just chatting with John earlier. This isn't a thinking about the donut, this is feeling the donut. So when I convened my learning marathon, there was a couple of provocations that have always been interesting to me. So there was a great activist called Edward Abbey, and he said, "Sentiment without action is the ruin of the soul." And that really struck with me, this idea, like we really feel the pain of the world, we feel the problems, we feel the injustices, whether it's social injustices, racial injustices, injustice to the sort of ecological. But actually then, what do we do about it? How do we act on it? How do we turn that sentiment into action? And actually, if we don't act, these problems get deeper in ourselves. And he talks of ruining the soul. And I've always related to that, because I've found myself in those sort of despairing moments over the years of feeling like, what can I do? How do I actually act on how I feel about what is happening in the world? And then another great thinker, which was Gregory Bateson, great systems thinker, he had this saying, which was, the major problems in the world are the result of the difference between how people think and how nature works. So the major problems in the world are the difference between how people think and how nature works. And that really intrigued me, this idea of like how the natural world actually works and how modern humans have been taught to think, really, because I do think it's something that's been programmed into us, particularly in Western cultures. So those were the provocations that we've been exploring in the Learning Marathon that I'm hosting. And actually, the most interesting thing I think about all of this, and actually the thing that gives me hope and optimism, is that we don't really need any new technologies for any of this stuff. We don't kind of need any sort of massive breakthroughs. It's a shift in perception. It's a kind of just a way of shifting how we perceive the world. And it starts, I think, with noticing, how we notice what is going on around us. And so that's what I want to just spend a little bit of time talking about. Like, we can start to, as we start to notice all that is not human, the world we have not made, and that can be difficult, right? You might be saying, well, I live in a city and I live in this block and there's nothing there. And of course, we've got these visions of how we need to change places, like what is happening right here, right? How do we make places nature rich? How do we bring life back? And that's absolutely the dream that we're heading towards. But we also have the reality of every day, like how do we act today? And so this idea of starting to practicing, because it is a practice, a way to start noticing the living world around you. And the reason I think this is so valuable is because it can transform how we feel about ourselves. It starts to shift how we look at the world around us, but it also starts to impact how we look at our human systems. So as we're thinking about this donut work, we're thinking about how do I want this place to show up? How do I want the place where I live to change? What's needed here? By spending intentional time noticing how the more than human world organizes itself, it begins to help us, it deepens our questioning, if you like. So it deepens our questioning of what's going on. In fact, there was a Norwegian philosopher called Arne Næss. He's sort of responsible for this idea of eco-psychology, the eco-self, this idea that we're all part of a living system. There's a permeability between us and the natural world. And so there's a cycle of practice that he talked of, which is this idea, as you begin to notice the living world around you, you begin to deepen your questioning of how things operate. And then you take that questioning into the human social world that you're in, and you'll start to apply that level there. So you start to unpick, why do we do these things like this? And then that adds to a deepening of commitment to change things for the better, and a commitment to protect, regenerate this living world. So there's a cycle of action, sort of noticing, questioning, commitment, noticing, questioning, commitment. And it's something that we can all do really simply in our everydays. And so some of you might already do this, and there are plenty of practices and ways to do this. But one thing I thought I'd share, which is really easy, you can start today, tomorrow with this, is a really simple practice wherever you live. It's to find a spot. Now, some people call this a sit spot. Stefan Harding calls it a Gaian place. So it's slightly more sort of, you're going somewhere that's about a place which is alive. But most people call it a sit spot. But you're finding a spot. It could be near you if you're lucky enough to have, ideally a place which is there's less, there's minimal humanness going on. It's hard to find, but it could be a spot in a park. It could be a wood. It could be by a river. It could be in a garden if you've got one. It could even just be creating a space in a flat, but with plants and all kinds of stuff. But it's a spot where you go and you sit and you allow yourself, you turn your phone off, and you allow yourself just to sit. And that can be quite uncomfortable at first, because we're not used to sitting and being silent. But the idea is you're opening up your senses. You're sort of trying to stop the monkey mind chattering and kind of just sit and notice and sense, opening up our senses. What you hear, what you smell, what you see. And if you go back to a spot, if you find a spot and you go back to it regularly, once a week, twice a week, you know, even more if you like, but at least once or twice a week, and you do it over a period of time, you'll start to understand, you'll start to sort of see this whole extraordinary, tiny little slice of our living earth come to life where you are. You'll start to see all these relationships going on. You'll start to notice how all these things are interacting with each other. Some of them will be really sort of tangible. They might be creatures. Some of them will be intangible. You'll sort of sense and smells. And so by starting to notice life like this, one, it helps us make sense of what's going on inside us when we're trying to sort of deal with difficult problems that we're all trying to deal with every day. But the other thing is it starts to help us notice the relationships that are going on, that life is actually all about relationships. And that practice can be transformative, actually. If you do it regularly, it can be transformative, because it opens us up to seeing the world as a world of relationships and of shifts, and that things are always moving and changing. So a little practice like that. If you can't do any of that, as I say, Stefan Harding will talk about creating these Gaian spaces that you can even create in your home. It could just be some plants that you pull together and you sit at, and sometimes take the questions that sometimes you can go and do a sit spot. It might be a question that you're working with. It might be your inquiry here with the Doughnut Economics, but something sometimes that you're wrestling with. Take it to your sit spot, sit with it. Don't overanalyze it, but just sit with it and see what comes up. And so these simple practices, they're important because we feel stuff through them. And as I think part of this shift, part of this redesign, is about how do we feel our way into a world that is more, where our hearts are more open, where we're open to knowing the world slightly differently, not just in our heads. So I really recommend that. And then why I think this is so interesting with the neighbourhood economics is, actually, when we think of the scale of things like ecological problems, climate change, it can be so overwhelming, right? Because you go, oh my God, it's the planet. I can't cope with planetary scale issues. But actually, the natural world doesn't do things at scale. It tends to sort of, it doesn't commute, if you like. It's kind of very localized, the living world. So it's kind of interesting for this work when you sort of think of that. And there's a naturalist, environmentalist, Gary Snyder. He has this saying called the 5-mile radius. And he said, wherever you are, just get to know the 5-mile radius of where you live. And by getting to know it, he'd say, really getting to know it, get to know the stories of that places, the histories, the geological time, the myths of it, the creatures that exist in that places. Get to know it so intimately, so that you become really, really connected with that place. And I think why that is so interesting for this work is that I think that's part of it. What are these places calling for that we live in? What is it that the more than human world is calling for, as well as our human communities? What are these places maybe about now? What are they suggesting? Because I think there is, as we come out of this industrial unraveling, this great unraveling as, this great turning, as Joanna Macy would say, moving from this industrial culture to sort of life-sustaining cultures. The importance of these places is so immense, and so really understanding them intimately from multiple perspectives feels really important. And the good thing about this is it feels really good. It might be a bit weird when people see you sitting there quietly sort of by a spot. People go, what's they doing? But the more we can normalise that, that kind of stuff. But it feels good. It helps us build our imaginal capacities. This real thing about imagination is it our senses that actually open up our imagination? So if we start to practice opening up our senses more, what does that do to our imagination? So a little bit there, and I'll just finish with this little provocation. So what I've discovered is, by starting to understand that, in ecology, it's all about relationships. And I think it's the same with these human communities that we're trying to create and the places we live. It's all about relationships, right? And you start to understand that all these multiple relationships, everything's interacting with something. And what I've noticed is when you study and observe how the more than human world operates, you start to see that everything, every creature, everything has some kind of gift, something they're doing as part of their they're very spontaneous. It's a beautiful thing. I think like life is really spontaneous. Like the non-human world is really spontaneous. It just spontaneously does what it needs to do. And it doesn't look like anyone's overthinking shit in the non-human world. They're just spontaneously being themselves. But there's something that seems to happen through everyone's actions. There's something that seems to happen which is benefiting or contributing to the whole. That always, if you look at it, as you study insects or birds or plants, you'll notice that everything is doing something. There's something that everything is doing that is benefiting the whole. And so I'm really interested in that. And so this analogy I have in the podcast I do, The Spaceship Earth, is this idea of becoming crew. It's like, if we imagine the Earth as a great living spaceship and everyone's required to contribute to its health, so they keep it flying, like what is it? What is it that we're doing? And this question of what happens through us, so something's happening through everything in life. There's something that's happening through them that's benefiting the whole. And I think industrial cultures has got us into a lot of problems because what happens through us, without us knowing a lot of the time, is quite destructive. We're sort of, it could be the way we're buying things, it could be the way we're speaking to people, it could be the way that we're being told to sort of get into line. All these things have impacts. Things are happening through us all the time. And so for me, there's this really interesting inquiry. It's like, well, what is happening through me? What is happening through the more than human world? What can I learn from observing other life? And what does that mean for me and the places I live in? So I'll probably leave it at that, but I thought seeing that Robin Wall Kimmerer is fairly well referenced on the walls, I'll just finish with a little, it's a little meditation from her, which is actually about, it's like a little meditation on when you harvest, i.e. when you go out and gather food. But you can I apply this to like foraging, you can forage in the city, you can forage anywhere, which is a great way to sort of notice stuff. But I actually think it's just a beautiful thing which I think applies to everything. So she says, know the ways of the ones who take care of you so that you may take care of them. Introduce yourself, be accountable as the one who comes asking for life. Ask permission before taking, abide by the answer. Never take the first, never take the last. Take only what you need, take only that which is given. Never take more than half, leave some for others. Harvest in a way that minimizes harm. Use it respectfully. Never waste what you have taken. Share. Give thanks for what you've been given. Give a gift in reciprocity for what you have taken. Sustain the ones who sustain you, and the earth will last forever. There you go. Thank you.